And thanks for joining us for our discussion, Connect Anything, Access Anywhere, Communication Strategies for the Military. And we're glad to have with us Ken Gonzales, the Director of Federal Solutions Architecture at Verizon. And the title kind of says it all as far as what we're going to talk about today. But just to give a little bit more context, as I look around at the things Federal News Network has been covering in this space lately, feels like things are moving really fast all of a sudden. I think we're seeing more and more of an embrace of commercial communications technologies and not just lip service to the idea that that's the direction DoD needs to go. I mean, you see things like an aircraft carrier having hundreds of megabits of bandwidth available on board, no matter where it's sailing. And you see things like the Army truly moving toward a single network for both its enterprise and tactical communications. And those are things that just didn't seem realistic or possible a decade or so ago. But still lots of challenges. And some of the ones that come to mind are making sure that data is secure over those commercial pipelines. Once you start moving into what the military sometimes likes to call a transport agnostic architecture, and figuring out how to scale these solutions, figuring out how to make them work within existing policy, which wasn't necessarily written with these technologies and ubiquitous connectivity in mind. So that's all big stuff and hard stuff, which is why we've got a solutions guy here to talk about it. And Ken, I really appreciate you doing this with us and looking forward to hearing some of the ways that you've helped government customers work through some of these challenges and seize some of these opportunities. Maybe we can just start with the panel title as a way to get us started here. Talk about what that means to you, connect everything and connect everywhere. What are you hearing from your government customers about the importance of that, again, ubiquitous connectivity and what it brings to their missions?
Hey, hello, Jared. Thank you so much for having me here. So when you think about the way that we operate today in the world, right? I'm going to start on the commercial side or our daily lives and how that translates into eventually the expectations that we'll have connecting on the DoD side and when we are into mission-driven environment, right? How many devices do you have today that you can actually say can connect you to the world? Probably have a cell phone, probably have some sort of tablet. You will have a computer. Probably you have a separate computer for work, right? And you are one persona who has multiple ways of connecting into the world. And you are going to use either one of those depending on where you are and what you're doing. So if you're working on something sensitive and say that, you're in the middle of work, you probably will use your work computer, right? But the persona that you are when you are home talking to your wife or your loved ones is a different device, perhaps, connecting to different environments, right? So the idea basically here is that you are a persona, you have multiple devices. Some of those devices will have the same profile or should have the same profile to allow you to connect to do the things that you need to do to get your job done. Whether that is securing the world, securing the countries, or doing everything that you need to do. And you need to do that in a way that is secure. In a way that you as a user get identified no matter where you're coming from into the network. And that you get allow the access to the things that you need to have, rather than just having a very open way of connecting to anything that you want, right? It's basically your persona comes with a profile. That security profile defines who you are, what you're supposed to access, and you may come from different places. So in a way, that is the concept of connect anything. Now let's translate that into our warfighter world, right? Into the government environment. If you think about it, we are no longer connecting only people. Now we're connecting devices. So it could be a sensor, it could be a drone, it could be a person, it could be a computer, it could be a cell phone. It could be all these different devices that we now carry. And it's not just limited to who is connecting to what you are connecting to. So now you need to access data that is on a data center. You need to access data that is perhaps with the person who is 100 feet next to you and be able to communicate with that, right? Maybe it's a camera feed, maybe it is some audio stream or anything that you need to listen to. The reality here is that we are no longer bound by the way that we used to communicate and the expectation where we used to communicate 20, 30, 40 years ago, even 5 years ago. So you're connecting anything, you're going to connect that anywhere. Why? Because we come from a world in which we were also focused on connecting buildings or facilities, right? And we're moving from a site into, and now I need to connect everything to the data center. Well, no, let's move the data center. Let's go out now to the cloud. But wait a minute, there's more than one cloud. And now I need to connect to the multi-cloud. But wait a minute, now I need to also do peer-to-peer communication. So how and what on where you're connecting is changing. Therefore, why it's so important for us to understand that the concept is you need to be able to connect anything, and you need to be able to access it from everywhere. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense, but it also comes with another challenge, right? Because DoD also already has an issue with having more data than it can responsibly do anything meaningful with. And so once you start adding on, millions of new nodes that are not people, that are not buildings, that are all new data generators, if you don't do it in a smart way, in a strategic way, you're just compounding that problem, right? So talk through some of the ways that data management becomes important here as you move into this this greater connected space.
Well, one of the biggest pieces of this is that we are definitely producing a lot more data than we can actually handle, right? But the infrastructure that we are that we are in the process of modernizing along with our partners, right, is perhaps still not able to handle that capacity. So you need to be very, very selective in what your data is and what your data is supposed to be doing and where it's supposed to be going. And I'm going to throw something that is going to change or significantly shape sizes of circuits and flows, AI. The compute power that is driving AI is now typically centralized. Yes, eventually it will start to go a little bit more towards the edge, and you see now cloud edge computing and concepts like that, where you want that compute power to be as close as possible to the user, but that is not always visible. Which means now you need to be in a position to understand that you need to have a network that can support massive amounts of data being transferred, typically on the way up to be processed, and then on the way down as the result of a computation that will allow you to have the information that you need. Now, think about how that changes. Historically, we went with circuits that were, every time that you go into the commercial world, the idea or the notion was you're going to consume data. So circuits were asymmetric. I am going to be downloading data. Therefore, I am going to have a bigger pipe downloading that I'm going to be needing one going up. But if you're now in an AI-driven world, you now need to upload as much data or perhaps more data that you're downloading. Therefore, the constructs of the networks need to adjust to the fact that we need to be able to do that, but we need to do that in a way in which we are smart about what kind of data and what that data is supposed to flow. Because it's not the same to be on a mission critical environment where the data needs to be extremely low latency and critical that everything is crisp, of data that you are going to process for later and perhaps doesn't have the same priority. So in your network, you need to be able to catalog and identify the different type of flows and the criticality that each one of them those have, in order for you to be smart about your network and perhaps suppress types of data that don't need to be transferred at a specific time and could be done at off times. So that's kind of how everything is evolving right now. And all of this has to be done with the concept that security has to be inherent on absolutely every one of these connections. Security is no longer an afterthought.
Absolutely. I want to put a pin in security and come back to it for a minute, but just to finish up on challenges, I mean, I threw one out there on volume, and I think you had a compelling answer for that. What are the other ones that come to mind to you as everybody heads toward this more connected place?
Let's talk a little bit about some realities, right? One of the realities is that the desire to modernize our infrastructure is severely defined by our ability to get funding for all those things, right? In an ideal world where we could, use a magic wand and say, well, we're going to make it all happen, right? You would have the money to make all the upgrades and the things that you need to do to take us from not just a modernization motion, but actually take us into a future-proofing of infrastructure. In other words, If we go by the past, we don't change things every 5 years or every 10 years like we do in the commercial world on our federal side, on our DoD side. We make an investment and we expect that investment to be there for a long time. So if we are just going to deploy the technologies that are catching up with what we have today, we are already behind. Because by the time that we finish implementing that, we already are going to be behind what is available out there. So we need to start thinking on being very strategic on how we deploy networks that are going to allow us to grow for the next 15, 20, 30 years. Assuming that we may find ourselves in some facilities where the funding and or the budgeting is not going to allow us to make that. But there is another byproduct of that issue with funding, and that is you are going to have hybrid networks. Elements of the networks that are going to be modern, elements of the networks that are going to be able to support all these capabilities, and you're still going to have some legacy environment. So how do you marry, how do you connect the old with the new in a way that you do not create segmentation? You still allow some sort of flow of data, and that the network and the systems are smart enough to determine that you are connecting an old facility. Therefore, you cannot just simply flood the capacity of that network with all that you now have available on the modern side. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. And it's a great place to take a quick break. We need to stop here and we'll come back in just a minute with Ken Gonzales, the Director of Federal Solutions Architecture at Verizon. I'm Deputy Editor Jared Serbu on the discussion Connect Anything, Access Anywhere, Communication Strategies for the Military, sponsored by Verizon on Federal News Network. And welcome back to the discussion, Connect Anything, Access Everywhere, Communication Strategies for the Military, sponsored by Verizon on Federal News Network. And again, we're talking with Ken Gonzales, the Director of Federal Solutions Architecture at Verizon. And Ken, I want to kind of close the loop on stuff we started to talk about a little bit back in that first segment. Where we're starting to go is, the ability to do upgrades to networks. And I think as importantly, to be able to do them in a way that is relevant to the pace of technology and that can be done quickly enough to be tactically and operationally relevant too, right? And the way DoD networks in a lot of cases are currently constructed isn't quite there yet. Still a lot of old TDM circuits in the system and other things that are not easy to quickly replace. So talk us through how you think about that, the speed and the timing demands of all of this.
Well, that is a great point right there, Jared. Think about it this way: we are traditionally in these installations that we have as very much focused on the infrastructure that is already physically there, the connectivity, the fiber, the copper, and all these different things, right? It's also very well known where these are. So we need to be in a position where we can react very quickly and adapt in a scenario in which these facilities may not necessarily be available anymore, or that we need to be mobile and go anywhere. This is where wireless comes into play. And wireless, not just on the traditional 5G or cell phone driven type of connectivity, but also low Earth satellite as well, right? So what we are seeing is a high desire to understand how can we leverage these technologies that provide capabilities to quickly deploy and provide the connectivity that is needed to maintain the communications that are required for the missions to continue. And that is the concept of, it's not just connect anything, access everywhere, but you need to be able to turn it up really much in the turn of a dime. And that's critical. It's important, and we in industry are aware of the impact that it has and the importance that it has to be able to support the missions of our customers.
Want to make sure we get into a little bit of a discussion of security here, which is going to become more and more of an issue as DoD adjusts its transport to the transport agnostic mindset. Makes people a little bit nervous when they don't control the data pipes anymore. So once that's the case, how do you get people into a comfortable space where they feel like their data is still secure, even if they don't control those pipes?
Well, that's a great point. Look, security is a journey. Let's start there, right? It's not a destination. I cannot go and say, well, I want to secure this and I am done. No, threats are always going to be evolved. They're always going to be present. And there is always going to be a kind of mouse game of, They're going to be trying to find a way to get in, and we're going to have to find a way to get, to get any holes closed, right? So let's start with this. It's not just a formula that will have a finite answer, right? Second thing here is every single concept of telecommunications today can no longer be separated from the security aspects of it. Let me put it this way. We used to build networks, and then the security folks used to come and say, well, this is how we're going to secure it. Well, that's not the way. You can actually argue that the network teams are now composed of both the security and the connectivity sides of it. And what that means is security cannot be an afterthought. It has to be part of the design from the beginning. And why is that? Well, when we were used to point-to-point connectivity, there was a really good way to know what is connected to what. But as we're going into the world in which you now have hybrid networks, you have things that are connected through the internet, you have things that are connected through an overlay, you have things that are connected still through point-to-point. Now, these hybrid networks require that you have a way to homogenize this connectivity. And that typically comes in the form of overlays. These overlays are typically the ones that are going to be in a position to provide not only the connectivity, but the segmentations over the multiple networks that are underneath, right? So when it comes to security, let's make sure that folks are not separating the network and the connectivity when it comes to design and when it comes to the way that they're thinking about servicing the users. And the second thing here is risk, right? As important as it is to address the security, you also have to understand the risk, and the risk of doing and the risk of not doing. And that comes with, you have aging infrastructure. That aging infrastructure may not have the capabilities to be secure in a modern way, right? So you now need to do a risk assessment on how do you maintain connectivity that is secure between the old and the new, right? And you can also play with all the other variables, such as you may not have the money to invest on modernizing everything at once. So this is where all it starts getting together: security, connectivity, budgets, contracts, vehicles, and all these different things that allow all these things to come together between us in industry and our mission owners and do something meaningful for the country.
I think that risk concept is so huge for two reasons. One is risk may not be as big as you think, because a lot of what industry has done has baked security into some of these underlying products in the first place. And two is, I think people are getting better about understanding that there is risk to mission if they don't move ahead with what they need to do in terms of expanding their connectivity, expanding their data pipes, expanding what they're able to do with AI, because the enemy's going to.
Yes. Now, let me ping on something there that you said that we take to heart. Look, when we are securing a DoD network, right, we have to go to a particular policy and a particular set of rules that we have to follow and all these different things, right? But when we are doing banks, something on the financial side, something on the medical side, in the commercial world, you're actually seeing a catching up, or sometimes even a leading on some of the things that are being done in the commercial world because of the sensitivity, because of the impact to the nation as well on, say, on our financial sector, right? That could actually be intermingled to create better solutions. So this is where government is helping commercial be more secure, but also where commercial is kind of like also helping it to be as a test bed of the technologies that are going to endure all the things that need to endure to be successfully implemented on an environment that requires 100% availability.
I think one thing that we see across government is that technology is moving faster than policy. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that. I mean, because I think it's always going to be true. What are some of the ways that you help your government customers think through how to adopt the technologies that they want to adopt without feeling like they're running afoul of policy and then they're going to get themselves into trouble?
That's a hard one. Okay, I'll start there, right? But I am going to convert that question into a plea. Okay, and let me go there. Historically, when a government agency comes to us to do any kind of procurement, they come with a set of requirements. Somebody sat and defined, oh, we need to do this, and this is how it needs to be done. And in there will be the policy already embedded, right? I would plead that if we were to have the opportunity to understand the objectives, right? We will be in a position to provide a different thought leadership and actually even bring things that today they may not be aware are possible. Right? And when you start with objectives first, and then you define your requirements, everybody wins. Number one, the first one who is going to win is going to be our our nation, right? Because we're going to have better infrastructure, and then that needs to flow into the contracting elements here. A lot of the limitations that we have as an industry are defined by the government, by the government contracts in which they can procure, right? And we also have a great deal of fairness to deal with, right? Every single one of these solicitations need to be fair for everybody, and everybody should have a chance to win them. It's challenging to be in a position to be a consultant, right? At the same time, making it fair, and that's kind of like historically black and white. But if the process, say at an RFI or sources saw type of phases, allow us to be a little bit more creative and provide solutions, I think that everybody will win. And at that point, we will be really leveraging the power of the infrastructure that we have, the technical expertise that we have gained across an entire nation, and different kinds of businesses and different kinds of infrastructure running through our networks, and provide perhaps a better solution for the government.
Really just about a minute here left, and I want to give you a chance to talk about what else the government can learn from industry in this space of ubiquitous connectivity. You talked a bit about it in the context of security and the banking industry, but as the government looks across to what industry has already achieved on some of these things, what are maybe one or two major things that you think they can lean on industry to help with?
We are definitely seeing a big push for artificial intelligence to be part of the orchestration and the way that networks are reacting, right? We are seeing that on industry. We are also seeing a big push for an environment in which the persona is what is defined. I talked a little bit about this at the beginning, right? You define the persona, you define who that person is. Doesn't matter which device it is, right? So the applications need to be designed for that. And so as much as we talk about the network, we need to also focus on how the users are going to be leveraging this connectivity and how the applications are going to serve to that. And then it comes back to the data, right? And how the data is processed, where the data is processed, and how the data is secure.
A lot more we could talk about, but unfortunately we are at the mercy of the clock, so we're going to have to stop there. I really want to thank today's guest, Ken Gonzales, the Director of Federal Solutions Architecture at Verizon. I'm Jared Serbu, Deputy Editor at Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Verizon.